I wasn't expecting much that day, just the final session of a piece that had taken 4 months and too much money to finish. My half-sleeve was almost done, and all that was left was some shading and cleanup. Honestly, I was more focused on the numb spot in my wallet than whatever time I'd be spending at the shop. But then Caleb, the guy with inked fingers and that unreadable stare, looked at me and asked if I could stay late. And I swear to God, everything about that night rewrote how I saw him. And myself. It was a quiet Thursday afternoon when I walked into the shop. Third Eye Ink wasn't exactly downtown fancy. It was more like gritty charm with a side of incense and 90s hip-hop. Faded stickers coated the front glass. Flash sheets lined the walls inside. And Caleb, as usual, was tucked behind his station, hunched over his iPad with one AirPod in and the same black hoodie he always wore. He barely looked up when I walked in. "Give me 5, he said without glancing over. "No worries," I replied, dropping into the ratty waiting area chair. I watched him sketch for a minute, wondering what he was working on. Probably not my tattoo. He'd finished the mock-up weeks ago. When he finally stood, stretching slightly, he looked over and gave a nod. "You good for a longer session today?" I blinked. Yeah, why?" He shrugged. "Just want to get everything done in one go if you're cool with that. Might run past closing." "Sure," I said, trying not to sound too eager or too curious. "I'm free." He nodded again, his face unreadable. "Cool, let's get set up." I followed him to his station, sat down, and peeled off my hoodie. The room wasn't busy, just one other artist in the back working on a walk-in flash piece. I could hear the buzz of a machine, the faint bass of the music playing on the shop speaker, and Caleb's gloves snapping on. When he started working, it felt like every other session. Clinical, quiet, focused. But after an hour or so, the other artist packed up and left. Caleb said nothing. He just kept working, his hands steady, the needle dancing over my skin like he was in his own world. Around 6, he stood back and clicked off his machine. "All right. That's it for today, unless you're still good to stay." "Yeah," I said. "You said there's more?" He nodded slowly. "There's some filler I want to add along your side. I didn't like how it looked in the lighting before. It'll look better once it's healed, trust me." "Sure," I said again, more hesitant this time. He walked over to the front, locked the shop door, and flipped the sign to closed. That's when I realized we were the only ones left. The shop suddenly felt different. Quieter, warmer, more, I don't know, intimate, I guess. "You okay with taking your shirt off?" Caleb asked, voice low. Yeah," I said, pulling it over my head. "I've done it before." "Right," he said. But his tone was different this time. Almost like he wasn't talking about the tattoo anymore. He came back over, sat down beside me, and got back to work. Only now, he was close. His arm brushed against my ribs a few times, his breath close to my skin. I tried to focus on the familiar buzzing of the machine, the sting of the needle, but I couldn't ignore the fact that I was shirtless in a locked shop, alone with this guy I'd thought about more than I cared to admit. When he paused again to wipe down my side, his hand lingered just a little longer than usual. "Your skin's been healing great," he said, barely above a whisper. I turned my head slightly. "Yeah?" "Yeah," he said. "You take care of it." I looked at him. He was close, closer than he needed to be. His eyes flicked to mine, and I swear something passed between us. Something unspoken, sharp as the ink he was marking me with. "You all right?" he asked after a beat. I nodded. "Yeah. Just, this feels different." He didn't deny it. Instead, he leaned back slightly, peeled off his gloves, and set the machine down. "I've had a long day," he said, not meeting my eyes. Didn't expect to feel weird about working late. I was about to ask what he meant by that when he looked up again. Really looked. And for a second, the cool, guarded Caleb was gone. What was left was something softer, uncertain. And then he said it. "I didn't ask you to stay late just for the tattoo." I froze. I was still sitting there shirtless, the buzz of the tattoo machine lingering in my ears, but the air between us suddenly felt dense, like the room had shrunk, and there wasn't quite enough oxygen left in it. Caleb leaned back in his chair, expression unreadable, fingers loosely laced together in his lap. I wanted to say something, ask what exactly he meant, but part of me already knew. Or at least hoped I did. "You didn't?" I asked, finally. He shook his head slowly. "Nah. I mean, I do want to finish the piece, but that's not why I wanted you to stay." I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. "Okay." He studied me for a second. "You ever get a feeling about someone? Like, even before anything happens, you know something's there?" I blinked at him. "Are you asking if I've felt that way about you?" He let out a quiet laugh, more of an exhale than anything. "I'm saying I felt it about you." And just like that, my heart was in my throat. I didn't know what to say. I mean, yeah, I'd thought he was hot since the first session. Yeah, I'd imagined what his hands might feel like on me outside of a tattoo context. But Caleb? The guy who rarely smiled? Who barely talked unless it was about shading or ink healing? I never expected this. He looked up at me again, more nervous this time. "I've had clients flirt before," he said. "Sometimes it's funny. Sometimes it's annoying. But with you..." His voice trailed off. "With me, what?" I asked, my voice softer now. He glanced down at my exposed side, at the fresh ink still glistening under the ointment, then back at my face. "With you, I wasn't sure if it was just in my head," he said. "The way you'd look at me sometimes, the way you'd come back, even when you could have booked with someone cheaper." "That's because you're good," I said, trying not to sound breathless. He raised an eyebrow. "Yeah, that's part of it, but I was hoping maybe it was more than that." The silence that followed was louder than the machine had been all afternoon. I stood slowly, still shirtless, still half wrapped in paper towel and tape. I wasn't even thinking about the sting on my skin anymore. I was thinking about him, sitting there, watching me, waiting for me to either walk out or step closer. I stepped closer. Caleb didn't move. His fingers twitched once on the armrest, but otherwise he just watched me. "I don't flirt with every artist," I said quietly. "I figured," he said. "You were always different, quieter." "That's because I wasn't sure if you'd throw me out if I crossed a line." His mouth twitched into something close to a smile. "You mean like this?" And then he reached out, his hand brushing lightly against my side, right over the uninked space just under my rib cage. It wasn't a tattoo touch. It wasn't clinical. It was careful, testing, and it made my skin erupt in goosebumps. "Exactly like that," I whispered. He looked up at me again, his expression more serious now. "I don't do this," he said. "I mean, not with clients. I keep it professional, always." "I'm not just a client." His gaze darkened slightly. "I know." Then, almost hesitantly, he stood up. We were the same height, or close to it. His hand was still on my side, but now his body was just inches from mine. I could feel the warmth of him, the tension. It was coiled so tight between us, I half expected it to snap. "I thought about this," he said softly, "more times than I want to admit." "Me too," he exhaled. "Are you going to tell me I'm making a mistake?" "Only if you stop now." And that was all it took. The moment his lips met mine, something clicked into place. There was no hesitation anymore, no second guessing. It was real, warm, slow at first, then hungrier. His hands moved to my waist, careful not to touch the fresh ink, but firm in how they held me, like he'd been waiting to do it forever. We kissed for what felt like a minute, or maybe it was longer. I honestly lost track. When we finally pulled apart, our foreheads resting together, I could feel the shift in the air. This wasn't just late-night curiosity. It wasn't something casual. It felt like something more. "I still gotta finish your ink," Caleb murmured against my cheek. I laughed softly. "Yeah, but maybe not tonight." "Right," he said. "Tonight's for something else." After that kiss, everything changed, but not in the way I expected. We didn't jump into bed. We didn't tear each other's clothes off right there under the station light. It wasn't that kind of night. It was slower, more uncertain. Like we'd both just stepped into something fragile and neither of us wanted to break it too soon. Caleb pulled away first, not far, just enough to look at me again. His hand was still warm on my waist, his breath brushing against my jaw. "You sure you're okay?" he asked, voice slow. Yeah, I said, though I could still feel my heart thumping hard in my chest. Are you? He nodded, but it was cautious, like he didn't quite trust himself to say more. I sat back on the padded chair, reaching for my shirt, though I didn't put it on yet. The ink was still fresh, and I could feel the ointment sticking slightly. Caleb went quiet, grabbing some wrap and tape. When he stepped back, he was all business again, but there was something softer in the way he moved, something more aware. He gently wrapped my arm inside, smoothing the edges with his palm, then looked up. I wasn't planning this, he said. I kinda was, I admitted. He raised an eyebrow. Really? I don't book 4 sessions with the same guy for nothing, I said, grinning. And I definitely didn't stick around after hours for more ink. He gave a small, almost disbelieving laugh. You're trouble. So are you. That earned me a smile, a real one this time, the kind that made his whole face relax. I didn't realize how tense he usually looked until that moment. We finished cleaning up the station together. He wiped down the machine, the tray, his tablet. I folded the paper towels and tossed out the gloves. It felt weirdly domestic, like we'd done this 100 times, only we hadn't. Not like this. After we turned off the main lights, he walked me to the front, keys jangling in his hand as he unlocked the door. The street outside was dark and quiet. My car was parked half a block down. I paused in the doorway, suddenly unsure of what the hell I was supposed to say now. Caleb seemed to sense it. You want to hang out? He asked. Like, not here. Not tonight, just sometime? I looked at him. His hoodie was slightly wrinkled, his hair messier now than it had been earlier. He looked like someone who didn't let people in easily, and maybe that's what made this feel even more important. Yeah, I said. I'd like that. Cool. He shoved his hands in his pockets, like he wasn't sure what to do with them. I stepped out into the cool air, turning back to face him once more. Caleb? Yeah? You're a really good artist, he smirked. That a line? Little bit. Good, I deserve one. He stood in the doorway and watched me walk to my car. I felt his gaze on me the whole way, and for once, I didn't feel nervous about it. When I turned the engine over and glanced back, he was still standing there, hands in his pockets, a soft look on his face like he wasn't quite ready to go back inside yet. I didn't sleep much that night, not because I was anxious, but because my mind wouldn't shut off. Every little detail kept replaying, the look in his eyes, the warmth of his hand. That first moment of silence before we crossed the line we both clearly wanted to. The next morning I woke up to a message from him. Caleb, hope the ink's not too sore. Also, I'm off Sunday if you want to grab coffee. I stared at the text for a long time, and then I smiled. We met up that Sunday. It wasn't anything elaborate, just a coffee shop near the river, the kind of place that smelled like cinnamon and had too many chalkboards on the wall. He was already there when I walked in, sitting at a table by the window, dressed in a soft gray t-shirt and jeans. No hoodie, no gloves. Just Caleb out of the shop, and somehow even more intimidating in the daylight, but also not. He looked up when he saw me, a smile tugging at his lips like he was trying to hide it but couldn't quite pull it off. Hey, he said, nodding toward the seat across from him. Got you something. Hope you still like oat milk. I laughed. You remembered? He shrugged. You're the only client who ever made a whole speech about lactose intolerance during a shading session. I sat down, warming my hands around the cup. I stand by that speech. He smirked, but then his eyes settled on me, a little more serious. This is weird, right? He said. Like good weird? Definitely good weird, I said. But yeah, weird. We talked for over an hour. About tattoos. About how he got started. Some shop in Reno, apprenticing under a guy who chain-smoked and hated doing anything smaller than a forearm piece. About why he moved here. Why he kept to himself. He wasn't exactly shy, but he was the type who let other people talk first. Who listened more than he shared. Until now. And I told him things too. How I'd always loved tattoos, but never thought I'd actually get one. How I'd walked into Third Eye Ink, half on a dare, half out of boredom. And how I never expected the guy with the sleeve of black roses and the undercut to be the reason I kept coming back. By the time we walked out into the late afternoon light, I felt like I'd known him for longer than a few appointments. There was something easy about being around him now, like we'd both exhaled something We'd been holding in for too long. We stood outside for a second, awkwardly hovering in that post-coffee limbo. "You want to walk?" Caleb asked. "Sure." We strolled along the riverwalk, not saying much at first, just matching each other's pace. At one point, his hand brushed against mine. He didn't grab it, didn't push anything. But I felt that electric tension come back, like the night at the shop, only slower, softer. "So," he started, voice low, "can I ask something?" "Yeah." "When you first came into the shop, was it really about the tattoo?" I glanced at him. "At first, yeah. But I kept coming back because of you." He nodded, like he already knew, but needed to hear it anyway. "I didn't think you noticed me that way," he said. "I thought I was just the quiet guy with a needle." "You still are," I teased. "Just less quiet now," he chuckled. "Fair." We stopped near a bench. He looked out over the water for a moment, then back at me. "I don't really do relationships," he said. "Not because I don't want to. Just, I've been burned. A few times." I nodded. "I get that. But I keep thinking about that night. And now, this. And it doesn't feel like something I want to ignore." My chest tightened in a way I wasn't expecting. "I'm not in a rush," I said quietly, "but I'm not going anywhere." Caleb looked at me for a long moment. Then, without saying a word, reached for my hand. This time, he didn't let go. That day by the river was the start of something we both didn't have words for yet. Not dating, not officially. But it wasn't casual either. It was slow, deliberate. Like neither of us wanted to mess it up by putting a label on it too soon. We started texting every day. At first, it was about the tattoo. He'd check in on the healing, ask for photos, give me advice on lotion and how not to sleep on it. But it quickly turned into more. Random memes, music recommendations, a late night, "You up?" text that led to a 2-hour conversation about everything and nothing. 2 weeks later, he invited me over. His apartment was exactly what I expected. Minimal, a little messy, with walls covered in art. Some framed, some just taped up. There was a sketch pad on the kitchen counter, an open box of cereal, and a blanket half draped over the couch like he'd fallen asleep there recently. It was lived in. Real. He offered me a beer, then we ended up on the couch, sitting just a little too close, both pretending not to notice. We didn't get physically involved that night. We kissed, sure. A lot. But it was that same slow burn. Hands slipping under shirts, mouths lingering, breath shared in the dark. And when things started to get too intense, he pulled back, resting his forehead against mine. "You good?" he asked, voice thick. "Yeah," I whispered. "Are you?" He nodded. "Just don't want to rush it." I nodded too, even though every part of me was screaming to keep going. So we didn't. We fell asleep on the couch instead, limbs tangled, half covered by the same blanket. I woke up sometime before sunrise with his arm wrapped around me, his breath warm against my neck, and I didn't move. I just laid there, memorizing the way it felt to be wanted. The next morning, he made coffee, shirtless and groggy, and asked if I wanted to stay for breakfast. I said yes. Of course I did. Over the next few weeks, we slipped into a rhythm. I'd come by the shop after hours sometimes, not for work, just to hang out. He'd draw, I'd sit with him. Sometimes we'd talk, sometimes we'd sit in silence with music playing and the shop lights dimmed low. It felt like a little world just for us. But it wasn't all perfect. There was a night, about a month in, when I showed up and found him closed off. Quieter than usual, distracted. I asked what was wrong, but he brushed it off. Later, I found him sitting out back behind the shop, smoking a cigarette he'd said he quit months ago. "You sure you're okay?" I asked, leaning against the wall beside him. He didn't look at me. "Old friend came in today. He's part of why I left Reno." I didn't push, just waited. Caleb finally sighed. He outed me, back then, at my old shop. Thought it'd be funny. Thought it'd get me to man up. My stomach turned. "What happened?" he shrugged. "Nothing good. Lost clients. Got treated different. So I left." "I'm sorry." He nodded, flicking ash into a cup. "It's not your problem. Just brought up stuff I haven't thought about in a while." I looked at him. He kind of is my problem. If you're with me, I'm with you. That includes the hard stuff. He turned his head then, studying me like he didn't quite believe it. You sure? Yeah, I said. I'm not going anywhere. He didn't say anything, but he reached over, took my hand, and held it like he needed the anchor. That night, he didn't ask me to stay late at the shop. He asked me to come home with him. That night felt different than the others. Not because it was more intense, or because we finally crossed a line we'd been skirting for weeks. It felt different because when Caleb opened the door to his apartment and let me in, it didn't feel like I was visiting. It felt like I belonged there. He didn't say much at first, just tossed his keys on the counter, kicked off his boots, and pulled off his hoodie like it had been weighing him down all day. I followed, shrugging off my own jacket, watching as he moved around the space like he was trying to remember how to be comfortable again. He glanced back at me. Hungry? A little. I can make something. Or we can just do leftovers. Leftovers sound perfect. He smiled. Barely, but it was there. A few minutes later, we were standing in his small kitchen, eating cold Thai food from the containers with mismatched forks. The overhead light buzzed faintly. It was so quiet I could hear the hum of his fridge. And then, just like that, he reached out and touched my hand. Softly, like he was still checking if it was okay. It was more than okay. We didn't rush. We never did. Even when we ended up on his bed, limbs tangled, mouths exploring, there was this careful rhythm between us, like we were learning each other slowly. Like every kiss, every touch was a question, and the answer was always yes. He was quiet at first, focused. His hands mapped my body like he was drawing a new design with just his fingertips, tracing every line with intention. He didn't ask what I liked. He read it. In my breath, in the way I shifted under him, in the soft sounds that slipped out when his lips brushed the inside of my wrist or the curve of my shoulder. And when it finally happened, it wasn't rough or messy or fast. It was real. After we laid there in the dim light of his room, the sheets tangled around us, his arm draped over my chest like he was afraid I'd disappear if he let go. I traced a line over the tattoo on his forearm, some abstract pattern I hadn't noticed before, more negative space than ink. What's this one mean? I asked quietly. He turned his head slightly. It was my first. Yeah? Yeah, I was 19. Got it in someone's basement with a machine they'd built out of a pen and a guitar string. I laughed. That's wildly unsanitary. Yeah, he said. But I was young, angry, needed to mark something, didn't really matter how. I kept tracing the shape, thinking about who he must have been back then. About the people who hurt him. The ones who pushed him out. Tried to make him small. You're not that guy anymore. I said softly. No, he murmured. I'm not. I looked over at him. You're better now. He didn't say anything to that, but he leaned over, pressed a kiss just under my jaw, and held me a little closer. It was the first time I fell asleep in someone's arms and didn't wake up feeling like I had to leave before the sun came up. When morning light finally filtered through the blinds, he was still there, bare-chested, hair messy, arm thrown across me like I was his favorite thing in the room. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like a guest in someone else's life. I felt like I was finally part of something. Waking up next to Caleb became a habit quicker than I expected. At first, it was just the occasional night, after a long shift, or when he had no appointments the next morning. But slowly, it turned into something steadier. I started leaving a toothbrush in his bathroom. My hoodie showed up in his laundry. We found ourselves falling into routines we never planned, like cooking breakfast half-dressed or leaving notes for each other on the fridge. He still wasn't a talker, not about feelings, not about the past, but in his quiet way, he showed up. Always. One night, about a month after the first time I stayed over, I came into the shop just before closing. Not for a tattoo. Just to see him. He was working on someone's back piece, some intricate Japanese-style dragon, and I waited on the old leather couch near the front, scrolling my phone, half listening to the low murmur of the machines. I liked watching him work. There was something calming about how focused he got, how precise. Like nothing else existed when he had a machine in his hand. When he finished, the client left with a nod and Caleb cleaned up his station. Then he looked over at me, his usual quiet half-smile in place. You hungry? Always. We ended up at his place again, eating greasy takeout on the floor because he'd spilled ink on the couch that morning and the cleaner hadn't dried yet. We talked about nothing, laughed about a customer who had tried to flirt mid-tattoo and ended up passing out from the pain. Caleb even pulled out some of his old sketchbooks, something I never thought he'd let me see. "You used to do watercolor?" I asked, flipping through a page with soft brushstrokes and delicate lines. "Yeah," he said, watching me carefully. "Before I got into machines." "They're beautiful." He shrugged. "Wasn't the right medium for me." "I don't know," I said, still flipping pages. "They feel a lot like you." He raised an eyebrow. "How?" I looked up at him. "Careful. Intentional. More emotional than you let on." His face shifted. Not exactly a smile, but something closer to vulnerability. Like I'd just touched something in him he wasn't used to sharing. "Guess I forgot what it was like to be seen like that," he said softly. "I see you," I replied, "even when you try to hide." That night, we didn't do anything physical. We didn't even take our clothes off. We just lay in bed, facing each other, talking quietly until sleep pulled us under. And for the first time, Caleb didn't flinch when I reached for his hand under the blanket. He held on. A week later, something happened that almost threw us off track. I posted a picture. It was innocent enough. A shot of my arm, healed and vibrant, the ink popping in the sunlight. I tagged the shop, gave Caleb credit, wrote something cheesy about carrying stories under your skin. But the comments, some were compliments, some were casual friends, and then one read, "Damn, is that your artist or your man?" I didn't think twice before replying. Maybe both. I didn't even realize he'd seen it until he texted me an hour later. "Caleb, that's bold." I waited. Then, me. "Too much?" He took a while to respond. When he finally did, it was a single line. "Caleb, no, just new." That one comment, maybe both, ended up being a turning point. Not because it changed how I felt, but because it made it real, public, out there in the open, where things couldn't be brushed off or quietly ignored. The next time I came into the shop, Caleb was quieter than usual. Not cold, not distant, just thoughtful, like he'd been replaying something over and over in his head and hadn't decided how to land yet. He finished up a piece, cleaned his station, and finally came over to where I was standing by the front desk. "Want to go somewhere?" he asked, grabbing his jacket. "Right now?" "Yeah." We walked 2 blocks in silence to a quiet little bar tucked between a laundromat and a vape shop. He ordered a beer. I got the same. And we sat there for a while, side by side in a booth, the low hum of music filling the space between us. Then he said it. "I've never had this before." I glanced at him. "What do you mean?" He took a sip of his drink. Something that wasn't hidden, something that wasn't complicated in all the wrong ways. I nodded slowly. "And now?" He looked at me. "Now it's complicated in all the right ones." That made me smile. "I'm not trying to rush you," I said. "I just didn't want to hide it either. You mean something to me, and I'm not going to act like you don't." His hand slid across the table, fingertips grazing mine. "You mean something to me too," he said. "More than I expected. Way more than I planned." We didn't talk much after that. We didn't need to. The next few weeks were filled with small, quiet moments that made everything feel bigger. Falling asleep with our legs tangled, eating breakfast in bed while he sketched on my thigh with a Sharpie, running errands like a regular couple, and catching strangers watching us hold hands like they didn't quite know what to make of it. The last session of my tattoo, real final this time, came about a month later. He added a small design under the main piece, right along my ribs. A compass. Simple. Sharp. When I asked what it was for, he just said, "You said I helped you find your way, remember?" I hadn't. Not out loud anyway. But apparently, he'd been listening the whole time. When he finished, he leaned down, lips brushing just above the new ink, and whispered, "That one's on the house." I laughed. "That's dangerously romantic for a guy who doesn't do feelings." He looked up at me, smirking. "Guess I'm still learning." That night, we closed the shop together. Same as the first night. But this time, no questions left hanging between us. No hesitation. When we stepped outside, the air was warm, the street quiet. I turned to lock the door, but Caleb's voice stopped me. "Hey." I turned. And he kissed me. Right there on the sidewalk. Under the flickering streetlight. No one else around. But even if there had been, I wouldn't have cared. Because in that moment, I wasn't just some guy getting inked after hours. I was his. And he was mine.